Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Frank Sullivan from Digital Craftsmen, and this is Mikhail Drescher, our Senior Solutions Architect. And we're on to our third video in the series now, looking at security, IT security across the enterprise. In the previous episodes we've talked about encryption, authentication, digital identity, and what that means for you as a business. In this week's episode, we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into some other areas of security. We're going to play out a couple of scenarios here. So, first of all, let's jump right in. Mikhail, last week we talked about identity and access management.
Yep.
This week we're going to be talking about whether or not thinking of security in terms of perimeter defense is still relevant for business. What do you think?
If you think perimeter security is still adequate, then you're wrong.
There you go. That's all we have time for, folks. No. Do you want to go a bit deeper?
Of course. Yeah, I wouldn't have said that without having in mind to explaining why. IT over the last centuries has gotten more and more complex. It has started at where you had mainframes with attached terminals, and that was it. So you had a very limited, very secure, very easy way of securing the system because it didn't have any external connections. It didn't have any variety of clients connected to it. They were all the same. They were all used to call these X11 terminals.
Yeah, punch in, punch out on the time
exactly. It's a bit like that. You punch in, punch out the X11 terminals. One was exactly the same as the other, and every software, every type of font, display, or whatever, these things were literally dumb in the sense that they were just a viewport into what you were allowed to do on the mainframe. Yeah? With that, after that, with the invention of the personal computer, when Apple started to become big, IBM started their personal computers, with Microsoft DOS in the beginning and others, it started to become much more diverse. More players entered the market, diverse hardware came into the market, and with that already complexity started to grow, with all of a sudden desktops having desktop PCs, and later on laptops having their own capabilities, and quite significant capabilities in time and in resources that they could provide users with. And it has always gotten worse. Now, these days, we are faced with cloud computing, which means that you start outsourcing your on-premise hardware. You used to have this way of talking or outsourcing your part of your IT infrastructure to co-location services, to managed hosting, to managed services providers that did certain added value to otherwise very well-defined locations. You know, when you go to managed hosting or managed service provider, you know exactly in which data center your services would be hosted. If you go to cloud providers, all of a sudden you don't know that anymore.
I have no idea where my data is. I wouldn't know where to begin defining what my perimeter looks like. It would probably be just a circle around the Earth.
And that is the problem, or that's the reason why I said perimeter security is no longer the only means you need to do. The only means to secure your IT landscape. And that means that security gets much more pervasive in the sense that it is not an afterthought anymore. It has to be security by design from the onset.
Mm.
And when you look at modernizing your own IT infrastructure, you always have to take security in as a first thought, as a thought of opportunity, rather than a thought of making things difficult, really.
Security is not and should never be an afterthought.
No, never.
Is what we're saying. Security by design, privacy by design, especially here in the UK, in Europe. GDPR is a very important topic. Let's go a little bit deeper now into moving beyond the perimeter. Let's have a talk about the security mindset. The hackers are already here. They're inside my network. They're smarter and more patient than I am, and they have malicious intent. If I go with those three things, then that makes me one paranoid individual. But maybe my paranoia is not justified in relation to the risk of a data breach. we talk about disgruntled employees walking off with important data sets, customer lists, that sort of thing. But now we've got everyone from hackers in their bedroom to rogue nation states looking to break cryptography keys, looking to tap and spy on companies. How do we ensure privacy by design when we're looking at an entire supply chain of IT companies?
That in itself would warrant its own series of videos, but let me try to simplify that in terms of a saying. In software development, and certainly in agile software development, there's a saying says, if it's not on the storyboard, it's never going to be implemented. The same goes for IT security, where we would say, if it's not monitored, it's not secure. Meaning, if you don't know and reassure on a technical level that the system works as designed, and not look at, oops, I'm in the media because people have stolen my entire client database, including the passwords and everything, that is something that you should be deeply worried about. So you have to have a monitoring strategy and a monitoring infrastructure in place that monitors your IT infrastructure. And ultimately, of course, monitoring itself.
So we're going to have a range of viewers, varying technical levels. We're going to assume that you already have firewalls and load balancing with encryption enabled. We're going to assume that you're doing all of the standard stuff. But what we've really talked about in previous videos was looking at the human factor in all of this. We've looked at the principle, we've actually written on the topic of social engineering, the psychology, and the principles of social engineering attacks, which are very sophisticated. Because at the end of the day, they say humans are the weakest link in the chain. Right?
Yes, they are, because humans can be deceptive, and can be deceived. That means where you craft a certain way of manipulating or engineering someone's trust, that's easier to go through the human route, social engineering, rather than trying to break with brute force technically reinforced or hardened systems.
Comes back to the adage, trust but verify.
Yes, it does. It also comes down to monitoring behavior, both of your employees, which is something that we can't really help with, but that's part of your security strategy. How do you treat your employees to minimize the risk of the not so mythical disgruntled employee?
It's a very fair point. I think one of the final things that we've actually been discussing internally as we see security trends evolve is something called protective monitoring. What you're talking about came from the principle that what gets measured gets managed. We know this from management school. But what is protective monitoring, and why is this so important to begin implementing?
There are several aspects to that. First of all is if you monitor that a system works in specified parameters, that's good and fine. What the system needs to do is to start alerting the right people at the right time to actually see there's something out of the ordinary. Let's go back again, we used the example of banks. Banks put something very similar in place, and that is fraudulent behavior.
Yes.
And that means, I had this recently with my own bank that I made a purchase, and they said no. And that was simply because that purchase I made was outside of what they predicted my usual behavior would be.
Yeah.
And this is no different in an IT infrastructure when a system, your email server, for example, or your database starts to behave or shows behavior that's outside predicted behavior, then the system should start acting either by sending alarms and let humans take care of it, or by shutting down connections. But this is already going into the realm of containing potential security threats. This is going into not implementing security, which means preventing any leakage, but also safety, meaning putting in measures that help you containing attacks, containing leakages, and prevent further damage.
Let's recap on some of the key points that we've talked about here. We know that IT is becoming increasingly complex. We started off this video talking about the concept of perimeter security and how, as computing has evolved from centralized access through mainframes, through to personal computing, through to the decentralization or the remote processing and storage of data, computing power, affectionately known as the cloud. We've seen how the evolution of those IT operating models has had a change on the way in which we secure our businesses. In the next episode, I think that we really need to talk about fire drills. What happens? How many people out there actually plan for what are they going to do on D-Day? Everyone is going to suffer a breach at some point. It's statistically inevitable. How do you respond to that? What's your plan? How do you mitigate those risks? We can also talk about hardening what's already there. We often talk about IT improvement in terms of incremental change, but what if you just need to take a chainsaw to the whole damn thing and redesign the privacy, containment, threat intelligence, detection, all of those efforts from day one. Stay tuned, and next week we'll dig into these topics. Thank you very much.
Until then.